Здравствуйте, welcome to Reading Russian. Today's text is a very short but extremely famous poem by Alexander Pushkin, which in Russian doesn't have an official title, and we see that by the three asterisks at the beginning of the poem and where a title might normally be found. And so in that case, we normally refer to the poem either by the first verse or maybe the first few words of the first verse. In this case, Para, mой друг, para. Right, so the English title I've provided, It's Time, My Friend, It's Time, is just a translation of those first few words. It's not an official title. We see it was written in 1834, and the poem we have here actually isn't a finished, published poem. It was found posthumously in Pushkin's notebooks, and if we note the date there, by the way, it's dated roughly to somewhere in May or June of 1834. If we keep in mind that Pushkin died in 1837, we see that he only had around 3 years left to live. And indeed, this poem was written under circumstances that sort of presaged the rather tragic final period of his life. And I'll tell you more about that in a moment. First, let's read the poem. Пора, мой друг, пора, покоя сердце просит. Летят за днями дни, и каждый час уносит частичку бытия, а мы с тобой вдвоем предполагаем жить, и, глядь, как раз умрем. На свете счастья нет, но есть покой и воля. Давно завидно и мечтается мне доля, давно усталый раб замыслил я побег в обитель дальнюю трудов и чистых нег. Okay, let's analyze the poem first and talk a bit about it when it was written. Again, written in 1834, at the very end of 1833, something in December of 1833, something rather unpleasant happened to Pushkin. The Tsar, Tsar Nikolai I, Nicholas I, appointed Pushkin to serve at his court as a kammerjunker, which was a rather lowly rank that was normally given to much younger men than Pushkin. So Pushkin took this as kind of a personal insult. And one reason for that was Pushkin knew that this appointment would tie him to Petersburg and to the court, because to serve as a kammerjunker, you were expected to don your uniform and appear at court for various ceremonies and functions and balls and things of that nature, when all Pushkin really wanted to do at this time was get away from the city and from high life and all the social intrigue and court intrigue, and escape to his country estate at Boldina and dedicate himself entirely to his writing. And you may have heard of his most productive period, which occurred precisely at his estate of Boldina. It's usually called the Boldinskaya Osень. Boldinskaya Osень, that is the fall at Boldina, right? Osень meaning fall. That happened in 1830 during a cholera epidemic. There was a quarantine, so he was kind of stuck in his estate for that reason. And he just had this almost incredible burst of creativity in which he finished his work on Yevgeny Onegin, his long novel in verse. He also wrote several маленькие трагедии, as they're called, the little tragedies, just short tragedies in verse, which I'll read elsewhere in this series. Also, the Повести Белкина, a collection of short stories, and other works, including lots of lyric poems. So it was an astounding burst of creativity. And so, again, at this point, by 1834, Pushkin realized that he was sort of stuck. And he was so enraged, apparently, when he learned of this, that his friends had to literally douse him with cold water to calm him down. So he was hopping mad. And his wife had recently suffered a miscarriage, and she was recovering at another estate in the countryside. So he was apart from his wife, and he was writing her letters in which he expressed his anger at this appointment. And come to find out later that the letters had been intercepted by the secret police and were given personally to Tsar Nikolai to read. So Pushkin also found out about this and was now even further enraged and rather brazenly began making his feelings known even more directly in his letters to his wife in ever more provocative language, with the assumption that the secret police and possibly even the Tsar would read it himself. And by the way, I should note quickly that the relationship between Nikolai, the Tsar, and Pushkin goes back a ways, and it's very complex. We may talk about it more later, but in essence, Nikolai had appointed himself personal censor to Pushkin. So they had a very tangled relationship. So I'll read you a couple of excerpts from these letters from Pushkin to his wife. The first one is from May 18, 1834. «На того я перестал сердиться, потому что тут réflexion faite, он не виноват в свинстве его окружающим. А живя в нужнике, поневоле привыкнешь к говну, и вонь его тебе не будет противна, даром что джентльмен. Ух, как бы мне удрать на чистый воздух». Let's just translate that. So, я перестал сердиться. I've stopped being angry at him. Note the italics, right? Meaning the Tsar, right? So I'm not angry at the Tsar, потому что toute réflexion faite, because all things considered, he is not to blame for the свинство его окружающим, for the свинство that surrounds him. Okay, this word свинство is maybe a bit hard to translate. It means something a pig would do, right? It's from the word свинья. So maybe we could translate it as swinishness or piggery, piggishness. А живя в нужнике, поневоле привыкнешь к говну. Living in a нужник, which is a rather euphemistic expression for a restroom, let's put it that way, right? An уборная might be a more polite word for that. Let's call it an outhouse, right? So if you live in an outhouse, поневоле привыкнешь к говну, then you'll inevitably get used to shit. И вонь говно, right? A rather obviously very provocative word in the letter. И вонь его, and its stench, тебе не будет противно, даром что gentleman, and its stench will not be repulsive to you, regardless of your being a gentleman. Right? Even a gentleman will get used to the smell of говно. Ух, как бы мне удрать на чистый воздух. Oh, if only I could flee, escape into clean air. Okay, so you see this desire for чистый воздух, a clear allusion to life in the countryside, away from the capital, away from the court. Here's another, sorry, that first letter was from July 11th. The second letter here is from May 18th, so just a bit earlier. Again to his wife. Без тебя мне так скучно, что поминутно думаю к тебе поехать, плюнуть на Петербург, да подать в отставку, да удрать в Болдена, да жить бароном. So without you, I'm so bored, or this could also kind of mean I miss you, I'm longing for you, life is boring without you, so boring that поминутно думаю к тебе поехать, that every minute I think to set off, right, to set off to see you, to join you. Плюнуть на Петербург, right, to spit on Petersburg, да подать в отставку, and to retire, right, to apply for retirement, to retire. Да удрать в Болдена, and to flee, to escape to Болдена, his estate, да жить бароном, and to live as an estate owner, as a sort of country gentleman, I suppose. And indeed, Pushkin did write an appeal to the Tsar asking for, number one, permission to retire and to continue visiting the archives. And the Tsar at first, through an intermediary, grudgingly suggested that he would allow the retirement, but that he would not allow a person who'd lost official favor and from the court to continue using the archives. And so that would have deeply upset Pushkin, but perhaps he would have accepted under these terms had not his friends intervened. Zhukovsky first among them, who had close connections to the court. Okay, so let's now look, knowing what we know now about the circumstances under which he wrote this poem, let's analyze it more carefully. Pora, mój drug, pora. It's time, my friend, it's time. So para just means, yeah, it's time we did something. It's time. Para, mój drug, para. Okay, so this is clearly addressed to a friend, and it seems quite clear, given the context, that this friend is his wife, right? This poem is, in a sense, addressed to his wife, and indeed it covers a lot of the same themes that these letters have, right? This desire to escape to a quieter life of creative seclusion in the countryside. Um, so it opens with this sense of resolve, right? Para, it's time. Покоя сердце просит. Okay, the subject is сердце. Сердце просит покоя. The heart asks for peace. And we get here покой in the genitive, as often happens when you have a desire whose object is more abstract, right? You desire peace, right? The heart asks for peace. The heart desires peace, or calm, or serenity. Летят за днями дни. Okay, дни is the subject. Days fly after days. Now note that the лететь, right, that's the determinant form of the verb to fly, right? So things are flying past is the idea, right? Not in circles, but they're fleeting past. The days are flying past one after another, right? Or literally, days fly after days. Days follow days. И каждый час уносит частичку бытия, and every hour bears away, carries away. And note, уносить, right? Уносит, far away. Частичку бытия, every hour carries away a particle of being, right? A small часть. So a часть is a part, a частичка is a diminutive form, meaning a very small part or a particle. Right, so, and we have a bit of wordplay here, right? Каждый час уносит частичку. Every hour carries away a particle of being. Бытие is a verbal noun from быть, right? So быть means to be. Бытие is being or existence. А мы с тобой вдвоем предполагаем жить, и глядь, как раз умрем. Мы с тобой, you know, that is kind of the Russian idiom for you and I, right? You and I, we say in Russian, мы с тобой, right? Literally, we with you, meaning you and I, вдвоем, the two of us, suggests kind of a great deal of intimacy. And of course, if we assume this is addressed to his wife, it makes more sense, right? You and I, the two of us, or together, just the two of us, предполагаем жить. We suppose to live, right? Предполагать, you see the pred there, it means before, right? So it's sort of a presupposition. You're anticipating something, you're hoping, you're planning to do something, right? So we suppose to live, we plan to live. И глядь, как раз умрем. And behold, как раз, precisely then, we will die, we die. Okay, it's a bit hard to translate there. The глядь is literally something like look, but here it means, well, sort of behold, or, so this глядь, and what does как раз mean? Как раз means precisely, right? Or just, right? Just now, just then. Как раз, precisely, exactly. Right, so the idea is the moment that you resolve to live, right, and you say, now time is fleeting, life is passing me by, and now I'm making this decisive move to live, to really start living. It's at that moment that, of all times, you'll die, right? So I think the idea is, we may want to live life to its fullest, but it's very hard to do, right? And before you know it, it may be too late. Okay, so the first stanza here is, actually it's not the first four lines, right? It's just kind of covering a well-worn path for poetry, right? Just the fleeting nature of life and existence and the inevitability of death. Okay, now halfway through, we have kind of an interesting turn that I think is rather unexpected, and gives us one of the most famous lines in all of Pushkin's poetry. На свете счастья нет, но есть покой и воля. in the world, right? In the world, there is not shastya, there is no happiness. Okay, and there we have our non-existence expression in Russian, niet plus the genitive, right? There is no happiness. Нет счастья на свете. There is no happiness in the world. Но, right? Note the strong contradiction here. There's not happiness, but there is, есть покой и воля. But there is serenity and freedom. Okay, so he suggests here, right, we have the same word in the opening line, pakoi, right, the heart was asking for serenity, and now he suggests that indeed that serenity is to be found, right, that happiness may not be found, at least not in a conventional sense, but calm and volia, pakoi y volia. What does volia mean? It means sort of two things at once. It means freedom and will. Right, so like freedom of the willpower, volia, right, the ability to do what you want, and I guess by extension, freedom. Right, so we could, I think, read that here both ways, right? The freedom from the court, the freedom and serenity of the countryside that in turn gives free rein to his creative will, right? His will to create in peace. And note, I think it's interesting how he contrasts that with shastya, right? I think maybe again, shastya, happiness in some sort of conventional sense. I think Pushkin, in many ways, although especially when he was younger, he was really quite a party animal, right? He loved to carouse and flirt and drink and all this stuff. But he always showed a lot of people were surprised actually, given his manner, his behavior in society and his ability to really focus and really work at being a writer, right? And I think the older he got, the more he really found this kind of labor to be a kind of happiness, or at least the greatest joy that he could hope to attain in this world, right? На свете счастья нет, но есть покой и воля. Давно завидно и мечтается мне доля. Okay, the subject here is dolia, right? Dolia, and what kind of, so a dolia is a lot, or your fate, or your destiny. And he describes it here as zavidnaya, right? Enviable, an enviable fate. Давно мечтается мне. For a long time it has appeared in dreams to me, right? And Michtatsa means to appear as a michta, meaning a daydream, something you wish would happen. Right, so again, завидная доля мечтается мне. It is dreamed to me давно, for a long time now. And so that suggests that we should translate this as a present perfect in English, right? Long, and let's make it an active sentence. Long have I dreamed of an enviable lot, right? Long have I been dreaming of an enviable fate. Давно усталый раб замыслил я побег. Okay, again, this давно, you see this refrain here, right? The repetition of давно, right? Long have I had this dream. And again, think back to the opening of the poem, para, right? I've had this dream for a long time, and now I'm decisively saying the time has come to make this a reality. Давно усталый раб замыслил я побег. Long have I, you see the я замыслил побег. I have plotted or conceived an escape, a побег. You see it's related to бегать, to run. So you're running from something, you're fleeing, you're escaping. And he calls himself here усталый раб, right? Long have I, a weary slave, conceived of an escape. I've plotted an escape. Куда? Okay, to where is he escaping? В обитель дальнюю, to a distant abode. And now we get genitives, genitive plurals. Трудов и чистых нег, right? To a distant abode of labors and pure delights. So there again is the theme of creativity, right? Creative trud, right? It's labor. So it's not some kind of happiness that's thought of as, freedom from labor, from from toil, right? Some sort of purely hedonistic idea of pleasure, but rather kind of disciplined, the joy that disciplined work brings. And he seems also to link the idea of trud to right, trudov и чистых нег, right, that labors and pure delights are somehow related. Okay, let's read it one more time. Пора, мой друг, пора, покоя сердце просит. Летят за днями дни, и каждый час уносит частичку бытия. А мы с тобой вдвоем предполагаем жить, и, глядь, как раз умрем. На свете счастья нет, но есть покой и воля. Давно завидная мечтается мне доля. Давно усталый раб замыслил я побег в обитель дальнюю трудов и чистых нег. Okay, why don't we scan the poem and see if the rhythm, the formal features of the poem help shed any light on the tone and the content of the poem. So to do that, I usually use just a dot for an unstressed syllable and an accent mark for a stressed syllable, because it's just very easy to write it out that way very quickly and get a look at the rhythm of the poem. Okay, so let's see. Пора, мой друг, пора, покоя сердце просит. Летят за днями дни, и каждый час уносит частичку бытия. А мы с тобой вдвоем предполагаем жить, и, глядь, как раз умрем. На свете счастья нет, но есть покой и воля. Давно завидная мечтается мне доля. Давно усталый раб замыслил я побег в обитель дальнюю трудов и чистых нег. Okay, I think I got everything. And by the way, there are some places where you could debate, for example, with pronouns, right? Like мы, я, right? Замыслил я побег. Is the ya stressed or not, right? So, but for present purposes, we don't need to really delve into nuances like that. I think this is a fairly straightforward scanning of the poem. And if we look over, we can see clearly, very easy in this case, that we're dealing with iambs, right? Look at the first line, right? Пора, мой друг, пора, покоя сердце просит. That's a perfectly realized line of iambic hexameter, right? Meaning that if we can actually do this with the entire poem, right? If we break up the poem into its constituent feet, these don't line up quite exactly, but it's my fault. Okay, more or less, right? We see we have six iambic feet in each line of poetry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then in some cases we have so-called feminine line endings, which just means we basically have an extra syllable at the end of the line. Okay, so this is iambic hexameter, right? Meaning six. Each line consists of 6 iambs, and an iamb is, of course, da-da, right? Da-da, 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 da. Okay, and a hexameter verse is the longest sort of classical Russian verse you're likely to see. And so it's a rather long line of poetry. And for that reason, usually in the middle, right, after the third iamb, right, halfway down through the line of poetry, you get a caesura, which just means a pause. I realize you can't read that because of the reflection. Caesura meaning a pause. And if you look down the poem, you'll see that often that poem is marked by a punctuation mark of some kind, right? A comma, an exclamation point, right? Para, мой друг, para, exclamation point. So there's a logical pause, right, there in halfway through the line. Okay, so let's see. The opening line is perfectly realized iambic hexameter, which is somewhat unusual in the sense that if you, well, let's talk about Russian meter generally. So poetic meter gives you basically the model. When you choose a meter, it gives you a model for how your verse will behave in terms of where the stress can fall in Russian, right? So this model tells us that the stresses should occur here, right, on the second syllable in each foot, right? And we see here that indeed that model has been followed perfectly, which is somewhat unusual in the sense that if you were to obey that meter mindlessly, the poetry would start to get very monotonous. It would lack any kind of rhythm, right? Da-dun, 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 just endlessly. But there are situations where that kind of throbbing, monotonous rhythm is perfectly appropriate for the mood of the poem. In this first line, we have para, mój drug, para. To me, that speaks of kind of resolution, right? Very bold, decisive phrasing there. And then maybe the second one, покоя сердце просит, to me speaks of a kind of weariness, right? Покоя сердце просит, right? The blows that have made the heart weary. And we have, again, in the following verse, the same thing again. So that makes more clear that maybe this kind of meter isn't accidental, right? Летят за днями дни, и каждый час уносит, right? Again, this relentless pounding of the meter, right? That in a sense conveys weariness. Now, where is the first deviation from that iambic hexameter meter? Well, what are the ways a poem can deviate from the meter? The most common way is for a syllable that could be stressed to not be stressed. And that's what we see right here, right? Частичку бытия, right? This fourth syllable could have been stressed, right? You're tempted to think it should be stressed, but remember, it doesn't have to be. The meter is just a pattern, a model. It doesn't have to be and really shouldn't be followed blindly, right? So this could have been stressed, but it's not, right? So that's a rather slight deviation, although here it's more prominent than it perhaps normally would be, just because the first two lines have been so perfectly realized, right? And again, kind of monotonous. So it makes this deviation from that monotony or that sort of relentless meter all the more noticeable. And so where do we find this little kind of lapse in the meter? Well, it's in the word bытия, right? And I always like to think of this as almost concretely or rhythmically illustrating the idea that bытие, existence or life, is being eroded, right? It's being hollowed out. It's slipping away, right? And we have this kind of rhythmic void here, right within that keyword бытия. А мы с тобой вдвоем предполагаем жить, и глядь, как раз умрем. Okay, now after this first deviation, we get more iams, right? А мы с тобой вдвоем. And now we get a bit more variation, предполагаем жить, right? So it seems to me that's the most, kind of the liveliest, the rhythmically liveliest phrase we've had so far, предполагаем жить. And then we're back very quickly to even more pronounced, a more pronouncedly fragmented and metrically realized iambic, the second half of this line. И глядь, как раз умрем. It really puts a very decisive stop to this. Предполагаем жить, и глядь, как раз умрем. Okay, look at the next, let's see, line 5, right? Again, we're back to the perfectly realized meter. So it's funny how this pattern, I think, expresses different things in this poem. I think here almost a sense of resignation or calm, right? На свете счастья нет. Okay, that may be again kind of this weariness theme. На свете счастья нет, right? There is no happiness in life. Но есть покой и воля. But there is serenity and freedom, right? There is calm and freedom, peace and freedom. So again, I think this transition from resignation to a kind of stoic affirmation or desire, right, for calm and freedom. Okay, now look at the next two lines. I think these are good to look at together. Давно завидно и мечтается мне доля. So that one's already breaking up some more. And I think, again, we're getting this tone of hopefulness, right? That he's had this dream, and the meter is starting to break up, right? Давно завидно и мечтается мне доля. Note also that there's no caesura there. I mean, there is давно завидная. There is a break between words, but it's not a heavy break. There's no punctuation mark. There's no real logical break in that line, and so it reads all in one piece. Давно завидно мечтается мне доля, and we see we're sort of racing ahead. Now we get the slight refrain here. Давно усталый раб, замыслил я побег. Okay, давно, and now a pause. Усталый раб. So now the momentum is being held back a bit. Усталый раб, right? Again, the weariness, a weary slave. Замыслил я побег. I've plotted, I've contrived an escape. В обитель дальнюю трудов и чистых нег. Okay, here's one more feature we haven't talked about so far: enjambment, right? Look at after побег. There's no punctuation mark. There's no logical break between the lines of poetry, right? So the замыслил я побег, we're waiting for a куда, right? An escape where, right? What kind of escape? And so that flows very directly into the following line: в обитель дальнюю трудов и чистых нег, right? An escape to a distant realm or abode of labors and pure delights. And we see that kind of enjambment one other place in the poem. If we go back up to the second line, right? Летят за днями дни, и каждый час уносит частичку бытия. Right? So again, we have this clear sense of motion, right? Every hour bears away. Well, what does it bear away, right? So we see this suspense that really just plunges us into the next line, where we get our direct object, частичку бытия. А мы с тобой вдвоем предполагаем жить, и глядь, как раз умрем. Okay, so there's just a very quick, we could say more, of course, but I always like to point out when scanning poems like this that it would generally be a mistake to think that someone like Pushkin would sit down and pedantically plan out his verse like this. It just, first of all, that would be rather hard to do, I think, for anyone, but certainly Pushkin wouldn't write like that. I think generally what happens is although he did revise his manuscripts a lot, he really worked at it, and often you'll find lots of variants for a given poem. Again, this one is sort of cleaned up and reconstructed based on his notebooks. But I think someone like Pushkin just basically has this innate musicality in their language, such that these things kind of come naturally. And then when you go and scan it, as someone like his own Salieri, who says that unlike Mozart, the genius Mozart, he picks apart music like he was dissecting a corpse, right? So if we dissect this poem like we would a corpse and analyze it, we see that, again, the form, the rhythm is almost uncannily matches the content of the poem. And so I think it helps you, again, appreciate the phrasing and the rhythm and the structure of through which Pushkin expresses his ideas. Okay, that's more than enough. Until next time, до свидания.